Rev up your engines! Okay, here's one for you. I'm going to talk about the best BMWs ever made. Yeah, Scotty always says don't buy a BMW. Well, they used to make great cars. If you didn't mind the price, relatively speaking, sure, they used to be a lot cheaper than they are today. But in comparison what the average car costs, they were always expensive cars. Now, BMW is kind of like Honda. They're really known for their engines. Originally, they only made engines. They made aircraft engines in World War I. And they got a lot of power and good fuel economy. The German military loved them. But after the war, they weren't allowed to make aircraft engines, so they made all kinds of crazy stuff. And then they decided in 1923 that they were going to make motorcycles. So you can see my Honda analogy here fits perfectly. They make great, reliable motorcycles, BMW. After all, a motorcycle is just a motor and wheels. The most important thing in them is the motor. And then in 1928, BMW finally started producing cars. Now, the first BMW that I'm going to talk about as being a great car is the 2002 TII. Now, the name might fool you. The 2002 is a model, and the TII meant that it was fuel injected, which was a rarity back in the day. The 2002 TII was produced from 1972 to 1974. Really quick little sports car. Back in those days, getting 130 horsepower out of a 2-liter little bitty 4-cylinder engine was a real achievement. It was really the beginning of luxury sports sedans, of which today there's a zillion of them out there. People either thought of you had a sports car or you had a luxury car, but you don't have anything in between. Now today the 2002 TII are collector's items. I got a customer that has one. It's his baby, you know, he takes it out on Sundays if it's not raining. They were an excellently built car that can stand the test of time. And sure, they were a little boxy looking, but I'm talking about great cars of how they drive, how long they last, how they run. And in that respect, these were great cars. Now, the next great car BMW made was the E30 M3. From 1987 to 1994 European Tour Championships, this car won over 1,000 victories. I'm not making this up, over 1,000. It won on dirt races, it won on paved races. So, it was a serious racing vehicle that you could drive on the street. People who bought these, they wanted the real thing. They wanted a real racing car. They didn't want to buy something that looked like the racing car with the body. They wanted one that the whole thing, the suspension, the engine. And they were. And that's why they have such a high value these days. You can't pick these things up cheap, but they were really well built vehicles. Now, another pick of mine of a great BMW car was the 633 CSI. Some people might not like this pick, but too bad. I had customers with them. They were excellent cars. They started making them in 1976, and originally the bodies were made by Karmann. It was a German company. Most people have heard of the Karmann Ghia, that Volkswagen. That was also a Karmann design. The company went bankrupt in 2010 eventually, but they were into making stylish cars. And the 633 CSI, they were so into the style that they only made them in 2 doors. They didn't bother making big 4-door ones. They kept them sporty with just 2 doors, and they were fun cars to drive. They had plenty of zip, especially with the standard transmission, and although they weren't the full racing version of some of the M30s, they were an excellent sporty 2-door car for driving around. And they didn't break down. Those straight 6-cylinder engines, they were just impeccable. Now, originally they had carburetors on them, but of course then they went fuel injected. Most sports cars back in those days, they rode like crap. They fell apart. These things were solid. They rode like a dream. They were zippy, but they were really comfortable at the same time. To me, the 633 CSI is a sleeper BMW. They made them for years and years and years. They didn't sell zillions of them. They were an excellent sports car for people to drive around. A lot of businessmen here in Houston had them. The ones that were serious about driving, they drove those things around. Now, the next BMW that was a great car was the 733i. And it was great as a luxury car. Now, they weren't race cars by any stretch of the imagination, but they were very luxurious, had plenty of power, and were very comfortable. They had plenty enough power to get around. They handled like a dream, but they had a very luxurious ride and interior. And of course, the earlier they are, as far as I'm concerned, the better they are, because they didn't have all the plastic crap that modern BMWs have that break down all the time. I had a customer with one that had 350,000 miles on it, original engine, original transmission. That thing just purred along You will never get that out of a modern BMW. Oh, that plastic crap will start breaking. The electronics will start breaking down. Every time I get a customer who's thinking of buying a used BMW, brings it over here for me to check out, and I hook up my giant $5,000 scan tool, I'll find anywhere from 17 to 67 different things wrong with the car when it scans all the electronics, because stuff just falls apart on them as they age. High-tech electronics using plastic sensors, plastic intake manifolds, they just have problems as they age. I guess even the Blue Jays agree with me on that one. Now, the last great BMW I'm going to talk about is a 1991 BMW 850i. I'm putting this one in because it had a real powerful V12 engine in it. It was a 5-liter V12. You take Ford, they got 5-liter V8s. Well, this is a 5-liter V12. So the pistons don't have to move as much. They have less stress than if there'd been a V8 engine of the same size. They were smooth, they were powerful. If you would compare their handling back in the day to other cars that were around, you'd be amazed at the difference. That there is a difference between the Rolls-Royce V12 and a purely BMW V12 engine. I had a customer once and they were going to put another engine into their Rolls-Royce. They bought an engine that a guy said, oh yeah, that's a Rolls-Royce engine. Well, they found out that it was actually a BMW engine. It was not the BMW style engine that Rolls-Royce had modified. And they ended up going to court and they won because they proved that the guy said it was a Rolls-Royce engine, that they had sold him for his Rolls-Royce, but it was really the BMW engine. And even though they're similar engines, they're not exactly the same. But the very fact that Rolls-Royce, who are known for engines, they made the engines for the Spitfires after all, and they make all kinds of jet and turbo engines for airplanes. The fact that they were using the BMW based design in the car shows you that BMW makes pretty good V12 engines. This V12 stuff, it's all going to kind of fade away to the distance because they kept putting in more cylinders to get more power and smoothness. But today, you can get a 4-cylinder engine that puts out more horsepower. I mean, if you collect cars, you want to buy one, sure, go right ahead, but it's not something you're going to buy and use for a daily driver. So now you know some BMWs that I think were great cars. And if you notice, they were all older versions. I'm not including any of the newer ones. But yes, they still make very good engines. They started out making aircraft engines in World War II. It's just that the rest of the cars, there's too much computer, plastic, planned obsolescence built into them for me to advise anybody to buy one in the long run. If you absolutely positively have to have a BMW, do like most of the Canadians do. Most of the BMWs in Canada are leased. They just lease them and then they get rid of them when the lease is up. So if you really got to get a modern day BMW, you like the driving, lease it, don't buy it. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.